Welcome to Real Physics, another proof how ridiculous all this particle physics business is. And we are starting with another bombshell video by Sabine Hassenfelder. Listen to this.
The incoming CERN director recently said that the LHC upgrade could show us how the universe will end.
I mean, how could any sane person believe that this is science to begin with? Okay? And as a sideline, since I'm talking about AI, this has nothing to do with AI. I mean, just an AI, which is a stupid little tool, would bother with CERN's data. If it's really smart, it presumably would stop funding and reanalyze the old data, which could be an interesting thing I talked about in this video. Anyway, let's continue. What's the mechanism? I mean, the crazy idea is that there is some vacuum, and this vacuum could be unstable, and then it immediately decays and destroys the entire universe. I mean, what kind of nonsense we are sold here? That's, by the way, the same stuff I have already mocked in this video here. That was another preposterous talk by Hitoshi Mayurama, who wanted to convince the public of the need for a new collider. Listen to this.
And so what happens here is that we all evaporate in a nanosecond too.
Yeah, we evaporate in a nanosecond. It's, by the way, a very old fantasy of theoretical physicists that something could be unstable and decay with catastrophic consequences. And to avoid this, you postulate a very long lifetime, as these folks here, 10 to the 500 years. What an absurdity. But listen what Richard Feynman, 40 years ago, said about such preposterous proposals. Somebody makes up a theory, the proton is unstable, they make a calculation and find that there would be no protons in the universe anymore. Bad. So they fiddle around with the numbers, putting a higher mass into the new particle, and after much effort they predict that the proton will decay at a rate slightly less than the last measured rate the proton has shown not to decay at. Okay? And when a new experiment comes along and measures the proton more carefully, the theories adjust themselves to squeeze out from the pressure. Yeah, you might laugh at this, but this is the reason why the big colliders are built. And sure, you might ask, why do you come up with this apocalyptic nonsense? If you talk about the proton, we don't even know why the proton has the mass it has and has the size it has. These are profound riddles which were unsolved for 100 years. Have a look at this video and nobody talks about. And instead we are dealing with these fantasy land stories here. And instead of dealing with the real problems, which are hard, I admit, we are inventing all this stuff of Higgs field and Higgs bosons and so on and so forth. Listen to that.
The Higgs boson, on the other hand, is a ripple on top of the condensate, metaphorically speaking.
And that is exactly the problem, metaphorically speaking. That's why I call the subchapter of my book Tweaking Towards the Metaphorical. Contemporary physics doesn't deal any longer with the real problems. They have created a world of hypothetical properties of particles. And I quoted a very distinguished particle physicist, Andrew Pickering. The most striking feature of high-energy physics is that it proceeded through a process of modeling or analogy. So, as I said, instead of wondering, for instance, about the mass ratio of the proton-electron 1836, this would be a tough problem, a tough nut to crack. Physicists invent these pseudo-problems of vacuum stability. And now Sabine Hassenfelder very nicely points out an inconsistency in this argument, because if the self-coupling of the Higgs would lead to a vacuum stability or a non-stability, that implies that you don't expect any new particles to be discovered. So when the incoming director CERN states that, oh, we're going to test the vacuum stability if the universe survives, he implicitly says we're not going to discover anything new, not any new particle at least. And probably that's not what he meant. Practically, by worshipping the end of the universe story, he admitted that there will be no discovery of new particles. And Sabine Hassenfelder calls that a lie. I wouldn't go so far. It's just a little bit of incompetence. And it reminds me from Leon Lederman, who said in particle physics, experimentalists cannot add a column of figures and theorists cannot tie their own shoelaces. And if you look how theorists and experimentalists communicate, there is certainly a bit of truth in that statement. Now, Sabine Hassenfelder is kind of self-confident when she says,
And they still haven't learned that each time they lie to you, I'll be here to call them out on it.
I wouldn't call that a lie, it's rather a funny contradiction, but I would say here, think one step further. As I have said, Sabine Hossenfeller did a wonderful job to call out the particle physics bullshit many times, as for example in this video. All the inconsistent nonsense, all the empty promises, all the shameless advertising for nothing else but to secure their funding, that's really great. And in particular, she slammed Fabiola Gianotti, the director, for her preposterous statements like this one and that one. But now you see all this crap, and now you see the very same people making grandiloquent announcements at a press conference, and you have full trust in what they are claiming, the discovery of the Higgs boson.
This is why the Higgs boson discovery in 2012 was such a big deal.
Really? You take that at face value? And apart from everything else, I think there is an interesting aspect. There is a period I would call the enlightenment of Sabine Hossenfeller. Let's say it's around 2015. And you notice that she's quite critical of all the discovery, more or less, that have been made later. But at the same time, she more or less believes everything that has been established before that period. Isn't that a remarkable coincidence? Wouldn't it be worth to dig a little bit into the history of particle physics? Wouldn't it be worth questioning if the statistics back then of the Higgs is really sound, or
whether the signal would just drown in noise?
That is indeed the question. I mean, this is the picture presented in 2012 at the Discovery press conference, and you see this peak here, which is already very noisy. But it's also a little bit of a lie here, because there has been a lot of background which was removed theoretically for proving the existence of the Higgs. But what we don't see in the diagram is all the rest noise of other particles, and actually the signal is just one part in 10 to the 11 or 10 to the 12. And that corresponds, I mean, the comparison, if you look at the Munich Oktoberfest and all the 7 million liters of beer drinking, this would correspond to one drop of beer too much. Go figure. Yeah, and the more general problem is here, yesterday's Nobel Prize is today's backgrounds. That's how it goes, and that's what you can identify as a general sickness in particle physics. I call it there is always a signal illusion. Endlessly refined sieving. Scientists are fooling themselves with excessive filtering, triggering, and background removal that necessarily lead to detections of poorly specified signals. So what we observe in the long term, if you look at the history of particle physics, it's kind of a hamster wheel. People are developing multiple theoretical fashions too vague to be scrutinized. They let particles collide in accelerators, of course, and then they declare a poorly understood signal as evidence for a fashionable new particle. Once this is established, they filter the new particle as future background, and then of course they ask for a new collider at yet higher energy. And in the course of 10 to 20 years, a generation which might be skeptical has died out. So in summary, it's great what she did. Another scam of CERN exposed. But think it to the end. The problems of particle physics did not start yesterday. I pointed out all this in more detail in my book, The Higgs Fake. It's not literally a fake, but I show all the absurd assumptions, the shortcomings, the pitfalls of particle physics, and from an even more general perspective, there is my book, Make Physics Great Again. I think that this technological way of doing physics is a consequence of the difference of European and American way of thinking in scientific traditions. There is also my book, Bankrupting Physics. By the way, I don't care if you want to buy my books, I'm happy, but you can also send me an email and I will send you a PDF. And there are other very good books also, like Noble Dreams, How Experiments End, or Constructing Quarks, or even The Phony Side of Particle Physics. If you want to understand all this enterprise of particle physics, which I think is a futile thing since 1930, go and read, look at the history and see how it developed. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it, and if you are interested in fundamental physics, subscribe to this channel.